إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فإن أصدق الحديث كتاب الله وخير الهدي هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار أما بعد يقول الله عز وجل في القرآن الكريم بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون وقال تعالى يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا ثم أما بعد. Lately, we have been reflecting over the past couple of weeks in the classes that are ongoing at the masjid here on Wednesdays with Sheikh Yusuf, reflecting on the story of Surah Yusuf, of Yusuf alayhi salam. But today, when we reflect on the story of Yusuf alayhi salam, our focus is on Yusuf alayhi salam. Today, I want to focus on the story of Yusuf alayhi salam from the perspective of Yaqub alayhi salam, from his father's perspective. And I want to do that because there is a lesson to be learned from the grief that he felt over what his own children had done. Some trauma happens to your child and you try to deal with it, you understand maybe somebody does something to them and you make excuses for that person. Maybe, they didn't understand Islam, maybe they didn't understand your child's perspective and they had a fight or they try to hurt them. And so your child gets hurt. But in this story, not only was he feeling the grief of his son dying, even though he wasn't dead, he had that grief, but at the same time he had the grief to deal with that his own sons did it to him. So you imagine that trauma, right? And it was so sad for Yaqub alayhi salam that he cried and he cried, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He records his grief in the Quran. And what does he say? He says, there's an elderly brother over here trying to get in the door. We can open the door for him, inshallah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, وَتَوَلَّى عَنْهُمْ وَقَالَ يَا أَسَفَا عَلَى يُوسُفَ وَابْيَضَّتْ عَيْنَاهُ مِنَ الْحُزْنِ فَهُوَ كَظِيمٌ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says about Yaqub alayhi salam, He says that he turned away from them and said, oh, how great is my grief for Yusuf. And then وَبْيَضَّتْ عَيْنَاهُ, that his eyes became white. In other words, his vision became white. In other words, he lost his vision. Right? How does somebody, and I'm sure many of us, especially the older brothers and sisters, you've probably seen somebody who's so grief-stricken by the loss of a parent or a sibling or a child that they cried and cried and cried, and somebody with so much grief. But we never heard of anybody losing their eyesight. Right? It makes us wonder. And in fact, I used to wonder when I was younger, I said, how do you cry so much that you lose your eyesight? I know the answer now. And many people actually don't know the answer, because it's actually a medical phenomenon why people lose their eyesight from something that causes so much grief. So actually, when you think about why did he lose his vision, it's not because there was something wrong with his eyes. There was nothing wrong with his eyes. The pathway, the nerves from his eyes to his brain, everything was normal. right? If he was to get the most advanced testing today, everything would be normal. But his brain refused to see. And that happens in times of severe grief, of severe trauma. In fact, this happens to be, developing neurological symptoms after grief is something we see all the time. Neurology is a professional specialty of mine, so we see this a lot. I might see somebody in my office, somebody who is a young person, is getting wheeled in a wheelchair, right? Their legs won't move. Why? Because 2 days ago they were in a car accident and they thought they were going to die. Their car flipped over and somebody got hurt and they thought they were going to die. That severe grief, the stress, the trauma of that made their legs stop working. So you can run every test you know. Right? Every test in the medical field you can run on their legs, on their nerves, on their muscles. Everything is intact. Everything is normal. But they can't move their legs. Why? Because the brain, it's not that the brain is malfunctioning, it's the mind, right? There's another element that we don't think about. Because there's the brain, the physical brain itself, which looks fine, which looks normal. But the mind, the control, what we call mental function, that is what is impaired. And so when you look at, because if you were to damage, let's say, the nerve that makes you see, your vision will never come back. Right? And so we know at the story of at the end of Yaqub alayhi salam, his vision came back. Why? Because the relief of that stress, of that trauma, of that grief, by knowing that Yusuf is alive. And so his vision comes back to him. You can see his brain, his mind is functioning better. And so, brothers and sisters, in this month, the month of September, happens to be the month of Suicide Awareness Month. Okay, so it's one of those times of the year where we try to emphasize the importance of our mental well-being, mental health, because just like we suffer from physical health and physical ailments, we suffer from mental ailments. And the mental ailments actually impact a lot more people than we can imagine. A lot more people. Because if you were to start studying, you say, okay, I want to know how many people in this masjid have diabetes. I take a little glucose monitor and I can test everybody. I will know exactly how many people have diabetes. But once you start assessing, how many people have depression? When you start asking them a checklist, do you have this, like, oh, I have this, but it's okay, it happened because of this trauma, or this because somebody did this to me, so I'm a little sad. I gained weight, or I lost weight, or I lost interest in life, this thing, that thing. We make excuses for these things. But these things are actually real problems that probably need real help. Yet we don't get help. Right? And many times when somebody comes to us, right, and they have a mental issue, right? Maybe they're depressed. They're severely depressed. Maybe somebody died in their family, maybe not. Maybe there was some other trauma, maybe their child was lost, or they were misguided and they left Islam, whatever. Sometimes without any trauma, people have these problems, without trauma. Okay? So our answer to them, a lot of times when somebody comes to us for that kind of advice, they want to talk, right? They want to tell us what their problem is. And our answer usually is, what's the most common answer? It happens to be the most common wrong answer also. It says, brother, your iman is weak. This is happening to you because your iman is weak. Because we're the same people, if we saw Yaqub alayhi salam, we look at him and say, Yaqub, come on, your iman is weak. Did he lose his sight out of the grief because his iman was weak? A Nabi of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? His iman was weak? So, when we think about our approach to mental health, our approach to mental issues, we tend to minimize them. Oh no, you got to pray a little bit more. Yeah, try telling that to Yaqub alayhi salam. Right? You got to purify your heart. You got to increase your iman. Right? And so somebody who says, man, I was so depressed before, but after talking to you, I feel like killing myself. Because we told them what? We told them, you feel so bad, but not only do you feel so bad, but you feel so bad because of another condition, which is low iman. And so now we're blaming the religion for something that is actually not religious. So this is a huge problem in our communities, brothers and sisters. Huge problem. I mean, let's not not minimize, here in a minbar, in a masjid, I'm standing here, I'm not telling you Iman is not important, right? No one would say that Iman is not important. Of course Iman is important, right? But we have to understand that these issues are real. These issues are real, and their only solution is not to pray more. And so imagine somebody who's suffering and they say, I'm suffering because my Iman is... Now Allah doesn't like me either. Imagine what you made them feel. It says, I'm suffering alone and even Allah doesn't like me because now apparently my Iman is low. Imagine how you just made them feel. Before they were all alone, had nobody, and now you even took away Allah from them. And so this is a serious issue in our communities. And it's actually not just in the Muslim community. The statistics are mind-blowing. Mind-blowing. And how common these problems are in the general community. And I would say the Muslim community is no different. We may not be better than them. We may not be worse than them. At the very least, we're the same. And perhaps, because of this kind of discussion, that we try to minimize and we try to force somebody to suppress those things by telling them it's related to their Iman. So I would say maybe it's even more prevalent in our communities, because whatever comes out, it comes out at the very end. It comes out when people have no choice, right? Because we teach them to suppress it. We teach them to hide it, to live in suffering quietly. And that is not from the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. Absolutely not. There's a famous hadith, I know in one of our classes on Monday evenings after Isha, we've been talking about the ideal Muslim. And very recently we talked in that class about your akhlaq with your body, right? And we talked about the importance of health. And a lot of times when you start to talk about the importance of your physical health, there's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that many people will quote. And it says, the strong believer is more beloved to Allah than the weak believer. Right? Many of us have heard that hadith. The strong believer is more beloved to Allah than the weak believer, but there is goodness in both of them. Now this hadith, most of us have understood this to mean that the strong believer, like somebody who's jacked, they're muscular, they're big, and they're strong, and they're athletic, that kind of believer. That's the believer that the Prophet ﷺ is talking about. And perhaps he's talking about that. But one shaykh, he actually reflected on this hadith, and I actually agree with him more based on the rest of the hadith. If you listen to this hadith and you tell me, does this hadith, is it talking about physical well-being or your mental well-being? Because the next part of the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ, he says, be eager for what benefits you, seek help from Allah, and do not be frustrated. Do not be frustrated. In times of stress and grief, we become frustrated, right? We lose our cool. And then he says, if something befalls you, then do not say, if only I had done something else. Rather say, Allah has decreed what He wills. Right? When something happens to you, don't say, if only I had done this, this would be better. If only I had done that, that would be better. If only I had done this, then this wouldn't turn out this way. And then he says, verily the phrase, if only, this phrase opens the way for the work of the shaitan. Opens the way for the work of the shaitan. And if you think about this, do not be frustrated. Is that a physical thing or a mental thing? It's a mental thing, right? And then he says that when something happens to you, you start thinking like, oh, if only I had done this. If only, it has nothing to do with your physical well-being. It has to do with your mental well-being. Because when something happens to you, you said, oh, if only I had done this. And then you start stressing over it, to the point where it makes you depressed. Right? And so if you think about this hadith, this is actually, in my opinion, that is more reflective of mental well-being, mentally strong people. And this actually goes in line with another hadith that is very common. It's not the focus of our talk today, where the Prophet ﷺ, he said something to the effect. He says, the strong person is not the one who can wrestle, but the one who can control his anger. Right? So what does he tell you about strength then? Strength is not the physical strength. Yeah, we should be strong and healthy and athletic and fit. Yeah, those are important. But the real strength that the Prophet ﷺ is talking about is our mental strength. Are we able to withstand the storm when it comes? Are we able to withstand the stress and the grief that life throws at us? And so this is an important reflection on being strong. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this is a common saying, we ask Allah for afiyah. Nas'alullah al-afiyah. Right? We say that we ask Allah for afiyah. What is afiyah? Afiyah is a well-being. Afiyah generally, it means well-being. Right? What is that well-being? Yes, it's your physical health, right? But it's also your mental health. Because imagine your arms and your legs, they're so muscular, they're so strong, they're fit, you can run, you can walk, you can swim, you can do everything you want to do. But imagine the stress that we talked about in the beginning. Imagine that stress, it hits you and your legs stop working. Now you, the pillar of the family, you're earning, you're providing for your family. Now not only can you not provide for them, you can't provide for yourself. Why? Because of mental health issues. Not because your body gave up, not because your body is weak, right? You might be in the best health physically, but your mental health is impaired. And so it's so important that when we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for afiyah, that we include not only our physical well-being, but also our mental well-being. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he used to make this famous dua every morning. Actually, he would ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he would ask him, Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min al-hammi wal-hazan. Oh Allah, I seek your protection from anxiety and grief. And so we should make that connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where we turn to Allah in times of ease and times of difficulty. But that doesn't mean that somebody who's struggling through that time, that their iman is weak. Yes, of course, we generally tell people, remind people, right? To make dua, to do dhikr, to do these things. But that is not the solution. And many people, I've heard, sheikhs, people who've studied Islam and Islamic madrasas, say that your depression would go away if you had, strong iman in Allah. No, it wouldn't. No, it wouldn't. It wouldn't. Because maybe some of it would, maybe it would get better, but it wouldn't go away. And that is not the cure, it's not the treatment. So we don't take Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Islam and our religion out of the equation, but we don't make it the only part of the equation. So let us not exaggerate in either way. We don't say, your iman and your prayer, your worship is everything. At the same time, don't say, oh, it has nothing to do with your well-being. Of course it does. And so there's how do we build? And this question came up last time when Sheikh Yusuf's class is, how do we build? What's the advice? What do we do to build our emotional well-being, right? Our mental well-being. Because everybody wants to know, okay, am I ready for the storm? Something happens to me, something happens to my child, something happens to my spouse. Am I ready to accept what's going to happen? Am I ready to deal with it, right? How do we get ready? Just like we say, you don't wait to get diabetes to start exercising. You don't wait to get diabetes to start eating healthy. But you have to work on your body before you get an ailment. Right? You eat healthy to begin with. You exercise to begin with. And then if something happens to you, then you have a higher, better reserve, physical reserve to function. Right? So for example, if somebody's very active and they're strong and they're fit, and then something, maybe they get some arthritis or they get some issue in their body. Now they're still able to function. Why? Because they have so much reserve built up. They're so physically fit. They were so healthy to begin with, that even a little hit in their physical well-being is not going to impair them all that much, right? So we call that build up your reserve, build up your reserve, your resilience, right? Resilience is a fancy word for bouncing back, right? Somebody, let's say they have a loss in their family, and they're sorry, they're sad, and yes, maybe a week or two later, and you see them in the masjid, and they're kind of doing their thing, living life and getting back into life. That's resilience. That's bouncing back, right? You don't take that trauma and you let it impair you and to disable you, but you deal with it. It might take days, it might take weeks, but you deal with it and you come out. And that is resilience. So how do we build resilience? So I did some research into this and found some interesting information. There's actually a book, actually several articles and books and things like that on building resilience, and they came out with five key points. And I'm smiling because those 5 key points, every single one of them is from the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so let's talk about them briefly. Each one is a khutbah topic on its own. Number 1, gratitude. They say thank people. Actually when people get admitted in mental hospitals, they will have them journal. They say, here's a book, every day we want you to write down 1 or 2 or 3 things that you're thankful for. Part of their therapy, in addition to medication and psychotherapy and counseling and all of that stuff, is show gratitude. Be thankful to people. Why? Because it's actually not the tongue movement of thanking somebody. It's because in your mind, in your brain, there are chemicals that get released when you're thankful. And those chemicals are good for the brain. Like, people don't understand. A lot of times when we tell people to exercise, for example, the exercise is not only for your bones and your joints and your muscles. The exercise actually releases, after you exercise for a while, it releases chemicals in your brain that are good, that preserve your brain cells. They're good for your brain. So just like that, gratitude, when you thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he says, if you're thankful, then Allah will increase you. Actually says that in the Quran. But the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he also taught us that we should thank other people. We don't just thank Allah, but we thank the people in our lives. And so, number 1 to building resilience is showing gratitude. Every day, think of something. In fact, I'm thinking about doing this with my own children, where we sit down and we think about, what are you grateful for? Right? Let us be, proactively thinking about these things. Number 2, show compassion. Right? Showing compassion. The Prophet ﷺ, and this is a huge part of the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. Huge part of his character, showing compassion to people. And in his famous hadith, he says, "Man la yarham la yurham." The one who doesn't show mercy, he will not be shown mercy. So showing mercy and compassion is part of building your resilience. So number 1, gratitude. Number 2, compassion. Number 3 is acceptance. Right? You accept, and this is something that should be easy for us to understand, because we accept the qadr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is something that might be difficult for non-Muslims, but for Muslims, we accept the qadr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? In good times and in bad times. We say, this is what Allah willed, then Allah is going to help me through this. And we ask Allah, and we rely on Him to help us through those things. So number 3 is acceptance. Number 4 is meaning and purpose. Having meaning and purpose. You know how much people, they struggle to find meaning in life. And this is one of the biggest problems with atheism, is that they don't, they struggle. It bothers their heart not knowing what the purpose of life is. It bothers them. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is a free, easy answer, easy peasy, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us what the purpose of life is to earn His satisfaction, to earn His pleasure, and go back to our home, which is Jannah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala take us back there. And number 5 is forgiveness. It says practice forgiveness. Somebody hurts you, you forgive them. Right? Again, from the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He give us the ability to do introspection, look at ourselves and how we can improve ourselves in not only our physical health, but also our mental health. Anything good is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Anything wrong is from myself. May Allah forgive me and all of you. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله الصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه أما بعد. Let's go right back into how we build this resilience. We said there's these 5 things, showing gratitude, showing compassion, acceptance of what happens to you, finding meaning and purpose, and being forgiving. And also we add to that, obviously, is having hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? And that's something, again, it goes back to the meaning and purpose, that if we have that meaning and purpose, then we can't lose hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So undoubtedly, when we should build our resilience, we should build our mental health, our mental capacity. And the way we do that is by doing these things that are all from the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to do more in terms of worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to building our connection with Allah. So we know that our connection, when I ask Allah, that Allah is listening. Right, that confidence has to be there, and we can develop that through worshiping Him. We can develop that through doing dhikr of Him, through reading the Quran, reflecting on His words, and doing so much more in terms of worship. At the same time, brothers and sisters, when we encounter mental illness, we shouldn't suppress it. We should seek help. We should talk to somebody who might be able to give us advice. And if somebody's giving you advice that makes you feel like you're not being heard, then you should talk to someone else. It can't be from the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam to just suffer and suffer and suffer, and there's no one to help you. And that is not from the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so, this is a huge problem. This problem is handicapping us more than the diabetes, more than the high blood pressure, more than the coronary artery disease and the heart attacks and the strokes. This problem is handicapping our brothers and sisters, adults as well as children, as well as the youth, everyone. Everybody is impacted from these problems. And again, these problems of mood, of depression, of anxiety, of thinking about the future and what's going to happen. And there's so many forms of mental illness that we know of, but these are problems. If it's not something that you can fix, if somebody comes to you, then say that, I can't help you, but I know somebody else who can help you. Or I will find you someone that can help you. And if somebody is so desperate to the point where they want to harm themselves or someone else, there's an emergency line which is 988. Okay, that's a number you should know just as well as 911. Okay, so 988 is an emergency line for mental health kind of issues. And just like we think about physical emergencies, we should think the same way about mental emergencies, especially if somebody's going to harm themselves or someone else. And so don't think about, what's going to happen, what's the public going to say, what's the community going to say. That's irrelevant at a point where somebody's in crisis and they're going to harm themselves. And we try to help them if we can, and if we cannot, then we try to get them help. The other thing is, brothers and sisters, we need to encourage people to get help. So it's bad enough somebody comes to you and you don't give them help. But at the same time, in our communities, we need to encourage people to seek help for mental. Somebody might come to me, somebody might come to you and they say, they're giving us all these problems and they have issues and they're struggling in their life. And then, we say, okay, you should talk to a therapist. It's like, no, I don't need a therapist. Yeah, clearly you need a therapist. You're talking to me. You want me to hear you. You want me to listen to you and give you advice. That's what a therapist does. That's literally their job. Okay? So you need a therapist. You need treatment. You need help. And so, just like I give this example, and you're going to laugh at this. Imagine we go outside, let's say a brother, he slips and falls on the sidewalk and he breaks his leg. God forbid, okay? And so you look at his leg and you say, oh, it's so crooked, I can tell it's broken. Okay? And then your brother, he gets up on his one leg, he starts limping to his car and he's going home. He's like, oh, brother, where are you going? Yeah, I'm going home. Like, what do you mean you're going home? Your leg's broken. Would you ever imagine that this brother would say, oh, don't worry, I'll just live with it? Never, right? But people say that about mental illness all the time. They'll say, no, it's okay, I'll just live with it. But physical illness, we never say that. And physical illness might not even have long-lasting complications, might not even have long-lasting repercussions. But mental illness does. And so these people struggle for their entire lives. And their children watch them struggling every day. Right? And because they're not getting help. And usually, one of the reasons that they're not getting help is because they're ashamed. They feel like the community is going to talk. Or they feel like, what are my kids going to think? But your kids are not better off with you struggling. So you need to get help. Right? We need to get help. And so we should encourage each other. This is not something, something, and we shouldn't look at somebody who has mental illness and think that somehow they're like an alien. Guarantee you there are dozens of people sitting here right now who are struggling with mental illness. Right? And we would be better off, if we see somebody with a broken leg limping outside, we'd be like, oh, that's weird. Right? But we don't say that to somebody who doesn't seek mental health help. So we should encourage that. We should help our brothers and sisters get that help. One of the things that that is sort of lacking in our communities is a concerted effort to provide this kind of help easily. So inshallah ta'ala, if you're struggling, you can come to the masjid, speak to one of the older brothers and sisters, or you speak to the leadership, you find somebody to help you, to listen to you. But at the same time, you can go online and there are many psychotherapists and counselors that you can talk to. But if there's a moment of crisis, then obviously remember that number 988 that we talked about earlier. And so we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that to give us the courage to do the right thing. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the ability to look at ourselves and see where we're lacking so that we can step up and fill those deficiencies. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept all the efforts that we make and forgive our shortcomings. رَبَّنَا تَقَبَّلْ مِنَّا إِنَّكَ أَنْتَ السَّمِيعُ الْعَلِيمُ وَتُبْ عَلَيْنَا إِنَّكَ أَنْتَ التَّوَّابُ الرَّحِيمُ ربنا ظلمنا أنفسنا وإن لم تغفر لنا وترحمنا لنكونن من الخاسرين. اللهم إنك عفو تحب العفو فاعف عنا. اللهم إنك عفو تحب العفو فاعف عنا. اللهم إنك عفو تحب العفو فاعف عنا. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. اللهم انصر الإسلام والمسلمين. اللهم انصر الإسلام والمسلمين. اللهم انصر الإسلام والمسلمين في كل مكان يا رب العالمين. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. And straighten your rows.
الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. والضحى والليل إذا سجى ما ودعك ربك وما قلى وللآخرة خير لك من الأولى ولسوف يعطيك ربك فترضى ألم يجدك يتيما فآوى ووجدك ضالا فهدى ووجدك عائلا فأغنى فأما اليتيم فلا تقهر وأما السائل فلا تنهر وأما بنعمة ربك فحدث. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم ألم نشرح لك صدرك ووضعنا عنك وزرك الذي أنقض ظهرك ورفعنا لك ذكرك فإن مع العسر يسرا إن مع العسر يسرا فإذا فرغت فانصب وإلى ربك فارغب الله سمع الله لمن حمده الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر السلام عليكم ورحمة الله السلام عليكم ورحمة الله
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah. First, we want to say Jazakallah khairan to the Shaykh for the beautiful khutbah and the wonderful reminder. Some brief announcements, inshallah. So we have the Little Khalifa's Academy starting this Saturday, as in tomorrow, 9:45 a.m. We have As-Sirat Quran Academy. This is for ages 5 through 17, starting this Sunday at 1 p.m. So Little Khalifa starting tomorrow, the Quran Academy starting on Sunday at 1 p.m. And then all the sisters and brothers halaqah today at Friday night. And then of course we also want to mention for next weekend, we have the Fiqh of Salah. This is of course the 3-day course that started about 2 weeks ago. So this is going to resume next Friday, inshallah. And then of course we just invite everyone to join our WhatsApp groups and our mailing list. So of course you could scan the QR code in the back of the masjid to join the WhatsApp group so you could stay up to date with all the announcements. And some of the stuff that's also in the works, we're planning a hiking trip, inshallah. This is usually families, all welcome to join. Usually we leave right after Fajr and we're back early in the morning. So that's being planned. The exact date will be announced, inshallah, once it's confirmed. And then we're also organizing an Islamic will seminar. So we're going to have a speaker come in and he's going to basically talk about the importance of wills in Islam, and then legally how to set up an Islamic compliant will here in the state of New Jersey. So he's going to be a lawyer background, inshallah. So we're working on confirming that date. Once we have that, it will be announced, inshallah. And then of course our prayers are with the people of Gaza, Palestine, the people of Sudan, the people of Lebanon and Yemen, and all the Muslims all over the world. Barakallahu fikum, jazakumullahu khair.